It's my honor to introduce the Maschhoffs today. I'd like to start with a quote. Ronald Reagan once said, "There's no limits to growth because there are no limits to human imagination, human creativity, and human wonder." When I think about that quote, I think the Maschhoffs embody that quote. Over the last decade, the Maschhoffs have increased their revenue by 15-fold. And as our industry lurches into its own unprecedented growth mode, I think we can all stand to learn and listen to business leaders who have executed the most successful pork production growth strategy of this decade. Sustainable growth requires strategic prioritization and the understanding that opportunities are infinite and resources are very finite. The Maschhoffs understand that growth is never by chance. It's always the result of resource alignment to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Everyone in this room stands to capitalize on the increased shackle space. But if history is our teacher, while some people will capitalize, others will capsize. Please put your cell phones away for the next 90 minutes or so and listen to the Maschhoffs business leaders as they share their story with you. As they share lessons learned you can apply to your operation over the critical months and years ahead. Listen to the Maschhoff story. It's one of growth through innovation and innovation through science-based risk management. Please join me now in welcoming the President of the Maschhoffs Pork Business Unit, Dr. Bradley Wolter, and the Vice President of Technical Resources and Support Operation, Dr. Aaron Gaines.
Thank you for that very kind and humbling introduction. It's a pleasure and absolutely an honor and a privilege to be in front of this audience this morning and to tell the story of the Maschhoffs. We, of course, were allowed to be here today, not on our own right, but as a result of the foundation that's laid, as a result of our production partner network and the family, a multi-generation family that we'll tell you about, that remains extremely committed, very dedicated to running a hog operation on the basis of a set of core values that we certainly subscribe. And we want to tell you a little bit about that today. Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for giving us this opportunity. I'm joined this morning by Dr. Aaron Gaines as well as Julie Berling. She joins me from our poultry business, our sister company, and she'll be bringing us insights from that point of view this morning. So really my objective this morning is to sort of set the tone for this conference. A keynote is something that a Compella group may use. I'm going to spare you my singing this morning, but I do hope that I can set the tone. I'm hoping that the leveraging of our strategic insights from a hog production company, our learnings as we brought our sister poultry business into our family, if you will, has certainly not only inspired us, but continues to inform our strategy ahead. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about where we're at today as a hog production company, our path as to how we got here today. Clayton has certainly set the stage, talked a little bit about our history. It has been one of significant growth, and we want to talk a little bit about some of those lessons learned along that growth path. But perhaps what we really aim to do is to look forward. We hope that the benefit of our history lesson today informs what it is that we see for our future, and if nothing else, perhaps we spark some dialogue. We'll take questions either formally or informally in the hallway as we plan to be here for the balance of the conference. So with that, I'll get into our materials. First, a little bit about our company. We are a fifth generation. We're family owned, as I mentioned. The assets not only those of the Maschhoffs, but our production partner, and those folks are always in the forefront of my mind. Again, it's really a solid set of folks. You'll hear me mention people a lot throughout the conversation this morning. That's really the foundation that enables us to continue to take on opportunities. We're headquartered in Carlisle, Illinois. We are one of the larger network of family pig farms in North America. We have about 750 production sites. A little over 500 of them are owned by family farmers that are part of our network, and the balance we own. We continue to invest in hog production assets. We'll talk a little bit about that this morning. The entire infrastructure gives us the capacity to produce a little over 5 million pigs here in in calendar year 16. And here recently we'll talk a little bit about the fact that we've decentralized some of our decision making as we've grown our footprint. We've restructured the business in the last 12 months, decentralized some of our operating decisions, and really continue to leverage 1,300 employees in a very capable way. 218,000 sows to support our pig production. And then, of course, we've got the support operations, which Dr. Gaines oversees in terms of feed mills, transportation infrastructure, environmental infrastructure, across our 9-state footprint. The bigger picture is that we are, as a hog production company, a member of a much larger multi-protein business. When we acquired our sister poultry business in 2013, we actually formed a holding company and named it Maschhoff Family Foods, starting to look out in terms of what we aspire to be as an organization. We obviously formed that, as I said, when we bought GNP, our sister poultry business. We're going to tell you a little bit more about that business and a little bit of the history behind how it has evolved. And as we look forward, I guess personally, and I know I speak on behalf of the entire team when I say we're as excited as we ever have been in the history of the organization, and that we now see ourselves not simply as a pig production company, but part of a larger puzzle that aims to bring healthy proteins that can enhance the lives of humans. And we're excited and continue to be inspired by that mission. Looking at the combined business, Maschhoff Family Foods, it continues to be family-owned, as I said, and really both networks, both on the poultry and hog production side, relies on this family farming network. We obviously on the poultry side, we are a fully integrated operation, and so that continues to guide our thinking and helps inform our strategy on the hog production front, where we're not integrated, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The total business then, in combination, is about 3,000 employees, 900 family farms as a part of our network, and we also then combine the assets in terms of support groups, feed mills, and the poultry infrastructure. Again, we do, Dr. Gaines and I interact, as well as some of the members of our teams interact with the poultry business, and we've continued to learn from them. The combined platform gives us the potential of about $1.3 billion in revenue. Within the broader platform, though, we remain very focused and, frankly, very excited. Dr. Johnson set the stage in terms of what's happening in terms of the U.S. marketplace, and we see rapid expansion, unprecedented, certainly in my lifetime. And we as a company remain extremely bullish and excited about the opportunities that are presented here. We continue to see pork, as we all know, be the leading meat consumed on the globe. We see that global consumption, from our point of view, is likely to be sustained as we see economic shifts. And we are likely to be the providers. We should be. When you look at the natural resource base here in North America, we are the obvious provider of that pork protein to the world. And what really continues to get us excited is we see the industry supply chain evolving in such a way to create opportunities. We think that comes on the back of continued evolution in technology, and we want to be a participant in that. And we see, as Clayton referenced, the volatility that's on our forefront, and we see that as an opportunity within our business. So how did we get here? It has been rapid growth, and certainly growth, I've referenced to the team many times, a double-edged sword. It creates opportunities. There's a lot of excitement. It also presents challenges along the way, and we've seen both sides. Really, our beginning is like most of us in this room. We come from a very humble beginning. We're German immigrants. I myself grew up in the area not too far from the farm, and so knew the Maschhoff family as a boy, and multi-generational German background. So I assure you it's always been cost-focused. I can speak to that personally as well. We obviously use the hog production aspect of the business through the 50s and 60s. Ken and Dave's grandfather being very involved, used it as most of us did, the mortgage lifter of the business, supporting a row crop enterprise through the 60s and 70s, and they found themselves continue to grow that enterprise. Again, very robustful and very committed family that just really enjoys agriculture at its very core and what it stands for. Of course, through the 90s, as Ken and Dave took over the business, working collaboratively with their parents, really became the decade of becoming pig production specialists. They focused, as probably many of you in the room are aware, they focused on growing the enterprise, focused on the support resources, things like feed mills that allowed them to continue to differentiate their cost of production, transportation, and then made long-term investments as well in terms of headquarters and other infrastructure, R&D infrastructure through relationships with the universities, particularly the University of Illinois, which is where I became introduced and involved with the family right in the late 90s. And then as you move ahead sort of into the next decade, if you will, the 2000s is really a decade of growth, as Dr. Johnson mentioned. Of course, Dr. Johnson joined the organization in the midst of this growth. In the early 2000s, about 2005, we actually doubled the business with the acquisition of Land O'Lakes pork production assets, and the rest became history from there. We grew very rapidly over the last decade, continuing to focus on those core assets as we grew the business that we believe differentiated us in the prior decade, continued to expand, and keeping those assets very current at the cutting edge from our point of view. We grew largely through acquisition. We did have some organic growth over the last decade and continue modest organic growth with new sow farms today. And so this brings us to 2014, where we had our last major acquisition with Signature Farms in Indiana. Along that path, though, I want to point out from an investment thesis point of view, we began to diversify outside of pigs. We saw the concentration of risk as the business grew, and we started first outside of meat protein, outside of the commodity price platform, if you will, and acquired some companies outside of ag, an electrical components company, a startup flashlight company, actually an asphalt company. And that brought diversification in both the revenue stream, did that very deliberately in the late 2000s, and then refocused back growth in the pork business and started to think about what does the business need to look like, what is the next leg in our journey. And we did a small pilot project where we looked at branding some of the product and working collaboratively with a firm in Des Moines that allowed us to brand a small portion of our product and start to touch the consumer very closely. Of course, we enjoyed a lot of relationships we'll talk about here in a second with a diversified customer base that was core and continues to be core to what we do, but allowed us to bring us closer to the consumer. And from that point of view, we had an opportunity to acquire the assets of GMP. It was a cultural fit as well. And we brought the poultry business into the fold, as I mentioned, in 2013, sort of a bookend to that rapid growth in swine. And we've been focused at capturing the synergies over the last couple of years. As I mentioned, growth being a two-edged sword, it obviously created a number of opportunities. It allowed us to bring in numerous assets into our portfolio and continue to shape the way we think and create new opportunities for us. It also brought challenges to within the course of a decade. When I joined the family, I could, within an hour, be in any one of our pig production assets. So a short pickup truck ride away, I could be in touch with the people and the pigs, and a short decade later, it took airfares and numerous days to get to some of our pigs across the 9-state footprint. And so as we reflected on that growth in recent years, we saw some of our production efficiencies begin to slip. And here in the last year, we've formed an entirely new business model, and that is to decentralize. So I'm certainly personally very much a believer that there is no more capable person within a biological function than that individual touching the pigs and in the heart of it every day. And so we've really created a decentralized structure rather than making all those decisions from Carlisle. We've created a decentralized model. We've carved the company up into 5 different operating regions and put general managers and teams in place within those 5 regions to help us regain and capture those efficiencies. The model is working very, very well. There's tremendous amount of excitement as we've seen, both productivity increases and cost reductions over the course of the past 12 months. Most importantly to us is that it has positioned us to better service our customers, our multiple customer model. We enjoy tremendous relationships, long-term relationships, certainly relationships that have a lot of positive history with 4 particular customers, one of which, of course, is our branded products. And we continue to participate as well with our pigs on the open market. We think that is core in terms of determining price and continuing to support a competitive market infrastructure. And so that's where we are today in terms of the position of our company and our customer base. We find ourselves today, as I talk about bringing efficiencies back to our business with a new operating model, we find ourselves at sort of a crossroads. We continue to recognize, as my comments reflect, that cost of production is absolutely core to remaining competitive on the globe. While we see opportunity, we recognize that we still largely remain in a commodity meat business, and we need to remain cost efficient. And when you look back over our histories, our innovations, our priorities have been largely that, focused on cost. At the same time, we continue to hear more and more interest from a consuming public in our operations, how it is that we produce our products, and certainly increasing number of expectations as to how that is to be done. And our consumers continue to set expectations through our customer base to us. And so, as many of you may be aware, we've recently were quoted, and I actually worked collaboratively, as did a number of other producers in the room, with some journalists with the Chicago Tribune, taking a hard look at the Illinois industry and how it's shaped today and what some of the social and regulatory issues may be. So we see, as we look forward, higher levels of expectation, the need to align on values, not only from a cost production standpoint, but values in terms of how our animals are produced and the expectations that consumers have for how we do that. And we look now to, we saw a lot of synergies, I assure you, when we bought the GMP organization. The largest, as I said, a set of core values and people that have absolutely been flawless teammates. And certainly we look there today now to inform our go-forward strategy. I'll give credit. Julie Berling is here to represent, and I want to invite her to participate in this discussion now and bring you the benefit of history within agriculture. I think as you look, as we talk about what is the forward direction, what are the next steps we need to take while we're at this crossroads, what types of investments do we need to make, what Julie and I talked about doing is taking a look back in history and taking a look at what have the lessons taught us, how has it shaped where we are today, and what does it mean for us tomorrow. And so this will be the balance of the presentation now. We'll take a look at history lessons, and Dr. Gaines will talk about where we go in terms of the hog business with those lessons in mind.
So how do you like that? I get to do a history lesson, so hopefully it'll be a good one. So one of the things, kind of as Bradley said, as we look forward, it's really important to look back to kind of to see how did we get here today. And if you look at agriculture and you say the face and productivity of agriculture dramatically changed during that same timeline that the Maschhoffs was growing. So in the 1960s, 21% of the U.S. population was involved in agriculture, whereas less than 1% is today. And one farmer was able to feed about 26 people, where 155 people can be fed by one farmer today. But as that productivity grew, there was all due to this green revolution that was happening, miracle seeds and GE that really came out and began to double and triple yields, and this was all very good and positive. And you also had the farm crisis going on, which was challenging the farm networks that were out there and the farmers that were out there, and you saw fewer farmers and the farms getting bigger. And then you also saw this no-till and low-till, and this is kind of when livestock waste and things really began to get called into question. So all this is kind of happening as productivity is going up, there's fewer farmers, fewer people had connections to the farm anymore. As that number of farmers go down, so does that connection to your food. So in light of that, we begin to see that food system scrutiny begin to increase. As all these good things were happening in agriculture, we really saw animal activism first kind of came onto the scene in the 1970s in the UK. And in the 1980s and 90s, it began to really gain traction, and there started to become animal rights laws written on the books. And as the impacts of biotech began to really come out and show reductions in pesticides, an increase in yields, and an increase in farmer income, there also was this perception of somewhat of this mad science, that genetic engineering and biotech is not necessarily a positive. You also saw more and more just modern farming practices called into question. Again, those people who were no longer connected to their farm began to not understand how you raise animals and what it takes to really produce that. And this map just kind of shows a graphic of all the different, this was kind of when the undercover videos came out, of all the different undercover videos that have been done that are very selectively edited. And again, we saw as an industry our practices, our regular everyday practices, really under fire and continuing to be so. And yet, in light of all of this, we see out on that horizon that by 2050 there'll be 2 billion more people to feed. We'll need 100% more food, 60% more in meat and eggs and milk, and that's going to take 70% of that growth is going to have to come from technology. And I don't know if anyone out here saw the whole series that the National Geographic did on food security. It's a really good series if you haven't seen it. But they posed the questions that science prevented the last food crisis. Can it save us again? And the real question is, will consumers let it? Because that's really, when you look at all the movements that are out there, it's really around that anti-technology of being able to bring food to the plate. While again, all this is happening, you also have some big fundamental shifts happening within the demographics of our country, and really this convergence and divergence of food trends really leads to these food movements. So when you look back to the 50s, that's really when the first McDonald's came out, so fast food was born. How many of you out here remembers Tang? There was a big move, if you remember, like how the astronauts ate, and Tang was one of the outputs of that. And then you began to see some more gourmet-type burger, like buffalo burgers and emu and ostrich, and some of those things started coming onto the scene. The USDA inspection, Meat Inspection Modernization Act happened in the mid-90s. Again, really beginning to get consumers' attention around food safety and where their food came from. Then in 2000, USDA came out with the USDA Organic Seal, and you began to really see that movement around organic begin to catch on. That's about the same time, shortly after, the no antibiotics ever, or antibiotic-free, really started to begin to hit the market. And again, you see more about clean eating, no GMOs, and all of that continues to mount. And you see a lot about different diets. There's paleo and the South Beach and your Mediterranean diet. There's all these other diets out there. You also are seeing a move toward vegetarianism. So 2014, it's estimated 10% of the U.S. adults claim to be vegetarian, and 73% say they're flexitarian. How many has heard of a flexitarian? Flexitarian are people who will eat, may or may not eat meat. So it's really an option, and 73% of adults say they're flexitarian. And millennials, about 28% of them say they'll go without meat at least twice a week. So this is really reshaping how we look at meat and meat protein. And topping that off, we had the internet really come into play during this time period as well in the 90s. And today there's 2.4 billion users a day and 3.2 billion searches done every day on Google. And so all this empowerment between these movements and diets and the resource to get it through the internet continues again to shape how the next generation looks at how they eat and how they make their meal choices. And yet, with all this information, empowered with all these facts and better food, we see obesity rise. So from 20% in 1990 to 38% of adults in 2016. And 1 billion go hungry while there's 1 billion overweight. And this year marked the first time or the first estimate where the next the generation that is being born today has a shorter lifespan than the generation before it because of some of the things related to that. So it just seems like all these things are dissecting. It doesn't make sense, but that's kind of what's out there. A lot of information, but not necessarily being used to really empower that. And on top of that, the millennial this year will have more spending power than any other age group. And again, that millennial audience is definitely more tapped in. They're more connected on that social space. But they're also looking for those higher order attributes, whether it's antibiotic-free or no GMOs or responsibly raised. And they're also a generation that does not require meat to be their main protein. One just has to look at the milk or dairy industry to see that. How much the share has been lost to coconut milk, almond milk, those types of direction to see that if you don't stay relevant to that millennial audience, you can quickly lose that. So this really creates some hard realities for meat protein. So you have these consumers who are very disconnected from where their food comes from. You also have a lot of misinformation and distrust of ag. This is one of my least favorite graphics that we always see of how does a chicken, get big so fast. And the thought is, the misconception is it's hormones. And we've never been able to give our animals hormones. But that is still, to this day, if we go into focus groups, that's the number one thing we hear. Well, you pump your chickens full of hormones. The non-meat movement, again, that there is an option. There's a lot of other options out there for protein, and especially with that millennial audience again, portability is a really big thing. Food that you can grab and go and eat, and protein that you can, take to the health or the gym. That's kind of what is out there, and meat has to figure out how do you make that work. And then you also have this overall empowerment, and I just always think this is interesting when you think of how fast good news, bad news moves today. So one piece of bad news undoes 5 pieces of good news. But when you consider how fast it moves, just a few facts. Every minute of every day, there's 41,000 posts on Facebook, 1.8 million likes. There's 2 million searches on Google, and there's 278,000 tweets on Twitter. That's in a minute, every day. And you think about how much connectivity there is, and when there's an expose or a video, it really puts us between a rock and a hard place to be able to respond. And so in light of that, we have to be eyes wide open and transparent about what we do and looking ahead to what's coming to be able to be prepared for that. And with that, I think Bradley's going to talk a little bit more about what that requires.
I failed really to give Julie a proper introduction, but by now you've determined that Julie really works across both of our organizations in the area of communication, strategic insights, and really serves as executive leader in that capacity. And you see that as you consider the history and the current state of the consuming public, there becomes a real question from a long-term investment point of view. How do we continue to grow the business in a sustainable way? And I mentioned that we've decentralized the business into 5 regions. Obviously, that's driven largely by our size and scale. Part of our thesis, as we consider how to best position our larger asset base, we really looked at our history as well as interacted with other participants within the industry and concluded that approximately 40,000 sows in farrow to finish is a more sustainable model as we looked at it from the standpoint of being able to operate it in a nimble and responsible way. And so that's what informed our structure. Obviously, every good team needs a leader. We've positioned each of the regions with a general manager, and we've also positioned them with the resources that we believe are at the core of swine production, starting first with the area of human resources and of course, not only the people assets, but the physical assets in terms of our areas of facility repair, maintenance, pig flows, health, veterinarians on each team. Many of them are in the audience this morning, and I'm pleased they're here. So that was the first underpinning for us over the course, as I mentioned, about a year ago, the 1st of October. We restructured, repositioned our people, particularly our leadership, under this sort of a model. Overall, we've kept our leadership team pretty small at the top. Again, I'm privileged to have the opportunity to lead this team. Julie, as I mentioned, working across both organizations, and has been helpful to us, continue to bring us insights, lessons learned, as you'll hear more in a moment, from our poultry business. Jeff Deason, who has a long tenure with the company, serves in both the area of finance and risk management. Dr. Gaines, who's joined me this morning, overseeing technology and the support operations. Morgan Dugan, oversees and responsible for our customer relationships, the entire supply chain function. And then we're blessed with tremendous tenure, gentlemen with a lot of passion, not only for people, but also for pigs. Patricio Vidal, who oversees our Great Plains region, really our western operations, primarily in Nebraska and Iowa. Dr. Scott Stellick, who oversees both the Heartland and technical operations. Technical operations is our genetic infrastructure, genetic multiplication systems, as well as then Heartland region, which is in just that, the heart of Iowa. And Sam DeHaas, who oversees our region to the south, that includes sows in Oklahoma, Georgia, southern Illinois, and then Paul Wettstein rounds out the group in what we call our Central Prairie region, which is Illinois and eastern Iowa as well. So I'm privileged to have the opportunity to lead a very focused and determined team that is as passionate about raising pigs and developing people as anyone in the industry. We've remained extremely laser focused. Given Julie's comments, we're challenged by how it is that we take this asset base that we have in terms of hog production and how do we position it in such a way, given the long-term nature, the capital intensity of it, how do we structure it in a way that it creates value? And of course, we're, as I mentioned earlier, privileged to have a multiple customer set of relationships. Each brings a different voice and a different perspective and a different context in terms of how we can create value. Remaining very nimble and very responsive to those expectations and aware of the current situation that Julie has called out for us. Again, the acquisition of our sister company has brought so much perspective and experience as an integrated business model. It has allowed us to look in areas of synergies in terms of where the assets are complementary. Obviously, the people I mentioned, our cultures being so very similar. Of course, we knew that from the diligence we had done in bringing the organizations together. The history that they have in branded meat protein has continued to help us better understand what types of things we need to do with an intensive production asset base to position that to deliver on those promises associated with brands. And we continue to look and collaborate to share those synergies across the two business units and position really both production assets in a way that can make a meaningful value contribution. Our history within the Maschhoffs has always been one of technology, science, and innovation being a significant portion of how it is that we drive value. We continue to invest in core areas of the biological model, being genetics, housing or engineering, nutrition, and health. And we really look to our resources, our asset base within the business, and particularly increasingly more, as I've mentioned, what our customer needs are to then drive towards solutions to their problems, again, ultimately towards the expectations of our consuming public. So again, you think about the asset intensity of the entire system. We want to be out on the leading edge. The relationship with our poultry friends, sister company, continues to inform a lot of the direction in terms of how we're investing. And as we look forward from here, we'll continue to look at the lessons learned. One of those lessons being that of antibiotic-free. And so, unfortunately, a colleague of mine, as Chief Operating Officer of the poultry business, was going to be here today, but has been pulled away for some operating realities that most of us can probably relate to. But Julie's agreed to pinch hit and tell the story. We want to, prior to asking Dr. Gaines to talk about how it is that our innovation model, we plan to apply it going forward, we want to talk to you about the lessons learned from ABF poultry production. And so I'll ask Julie to come forward and share that history lesson right ahead of Dr. Gaines to tell us how, again, we're going to apply our model to some of the consumer trends that we see.
So one thing that Bradley forgot to mention, though, is when we first started working, or I first started beginning to have the opportunity to work with the Maschhoffs, he made it very clear that I was going to prefer 4 legs to 2 very soon. So I'm getting there. So, but what I want to share is kind of our path to antibiotic-free or no antibiotics ever poultry, and share what I can from the operational side as well. As Bradley mentioned, I was going to have our Senior VP of Operations here to help me, so bear with me. I'll do my best to kind of provide that side. But it's been a very interesting journey. I myself have been with GNP company for 21 years and was part of this whole transition. So it's been a really interesting journey. So hopefully this will shed some light as we look forward. So kind of going all the way back to 2004. 2004, we do a lot of GNP company with our brands. We do a lot of consumer research, and we were beginning to really see in our research the interest in antibiotic-free begin to climb for consumers. Though when we asked why they wanted antibiotic-free, very few could articulate why. They just heard about it, thought no antibiotics is a good thing, and that's really where it was moving. And concurrently at the same time, we started seeing Golden Plump, which was our flagship brand, had always really ridden higher on that quality level versus our competition. And we saw our brand beginning to slip because niche players were out there beginning to introduce no antibiotics or antibiotic-free chicken. And the larger producers that were much bigger than us were basically buying market share by really going at a really low price. So we started to fall into the middle, and the middle is not a good place to go because we weren't the cheapest supplier, and we also didn't have those value-added attributes. So we began to really see the need for us to begin to move forward and to look at that antibiotic as free as an option or an attribute. So at this time, we didn't have none of our flocks were raised without antibiotics. Then moving into 2005, 2006, we began to do some field research. Our operations group started looking at it, began to test the use of probiotics, and began to see that, we could do a portion of our flocks with no antibiotics. And so we decided to see, can we add that attribute to Golden Plump and begin to elevate the the quality perception that was out there of the brand. And what happened is we launched, and then FDA reclassified ionophores as antibiotics. And all of a sudden we were no longer, with our feed program, able to be labeled as raised without antibiotics. And so we had to go another route. And knowing that we couldn't take our whole brand, all of our production, to no antibiotics right away, an idea of another brand was born, and that brand was called Just Bear. And at this point, we had about 10% of our flocks in Minnesota. I didn't do a very good job of explaining that we have two vertically integrated operations, one in Minnesota and one in Wisconsin, so you'll hear me talking about those two complexes because both of them are fully integrated and they operate pretty much separately of each other from that operation standpoint. Then in 2008 we launched Just Bear. We were not first to market though, and so we really had to do a little bit more innovation because we were kind of playing catch up to other brands that were already out there. So we also were veggie fed or no antibiotic byproducts. We also went out with an all-clear recyclable tray instead of a foam tray to really differentiate. And we made the product traceable. We put a family farm code on the product that allows consumers to look on our website and see where their package of chicken came from. Again, all those things, when I talked about the millennial and some of the new wants, they want to see where their food came from. That was a new level of transparency to be able to actually say, where did my package of chicken come from? Meanwhile, we were also seeing a lot of confusion out there about the term antibiotic-free, because technically, if animals are produced and raised correctly, no meat on the market should have any antibiotics in them. So we really wanted to go away from that description of antibiotic-free, so we went to no antibiotics ever. To really be clear, it's like no antibiotics ever, it's not antibiotic-free. And I do think that's a point of distinction to keep in mind as the pork industry goes in that direction, because we've spent a lot of time now trying to really re-educate people on that to make them understand it's not about antibiotic-free, it's about no antibiotics ever. And at this time, as we moved into this launch, we were about 30% of our Minnesota flocks were no antibiotics ever. Then the market continued to grow, and we added deli products that are under the Just Bear label. We added some frozen products. In the meanwhile, we started getting pressure for Just Bear to add organic because from a consumer standpoint, back at the customer standpoint, so the retailers that we sell to really want to have what they call a good, better, best strategy on their shelf. They want a good that's for people that are really looking like a good offering that's looking for cheap chicken. They want a better offering that may be like all natural and nothing added. And then they want this best category that may be antibiotic free or no antibiotics ever, but then they wanted the organic as well. And they said, we want to just have one supplier for that best category. And so that's where we really started to get some pressure around that. And in the meantime, there was really this rapid growth around organic growing as well. And at this point, we're ranging in 30 to 75% of our Minnesota flocks are no antibiotics ever, and about 20% in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is where we raise the predominant amount of our birds for the deli and food service business of what we sell. So really, in 2015, we saw antibiotic-free or raised without antibiotics really hit mainstream. You saw McDonald's and Costco and Subway and Chick-fil-A, they all were out there making statements about no antibiotics ever. But there's a lot of confusion on the consumer side. We did a survey and consumers are like, I don't know, they talk about taking out antibiotics that are medically important to humans versus no antibiotics ever versus, there's just a lot of confusion. So we really continue to stay with that claim of no antibiotics ever to be really clear to that consumer. We also, in 2015, launched a limited organic line for Just Bear as well to fill that customer need. And we've seen that grow tremendously. And today, in 2015, we were 100% of our flocks in Minnesota were no antibiotics ever, and still 20% in Wisconsin. And again, as we saw this, we began to look at golden plump as well. because we saw more and more of those claims coming through, we had to start looking at our flagship brand because that was becoming table stakes. No Antibiotics Ever was really merging into not this high-end attribute anymore, but this really mainstream attribute. So in 2016, we did launch our all-natural line of Golden Plump converted to No Antibiotics Ever. And we also came out with an American Humane Certified audit. So this is a certification that our birds are raised humanely. And we did that because to raise No Antibiotics Ever, we have to reduce flock density. And to qualify for the Animal Humane certification, we had to reduce flock density. So it was an opportunity for us to really gain more traction with the consumer by doing kind of both at the same time. So today we are, today we have made the statement that by 2019 we will be 100% No Antibiotics Ever in all flocks, both in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we've set that as our target. And as we look forward, again, this movement marches on, and you can see it's growing for other meats and other categories, and even, like you say, in fast food and the restaurants, it's really taking, really been getting a lot of press and activity, but that's typically where we see in the past, where we've seen trends emerge is in that food service segment. So when you really see it gaining momentum there, within 5 years, it's going to really be hitting that retail shelf. So when we look at the value of No Antibiotics Ever, you can see this is the growth for Just Bare. And we started at about $4 million in 2009, and we're projecting to be $77 million in 2017 with $125 million by 2021. And we earn a premium of about 25 to 30% over conventional. And that's just for our boneless, skinless product. That's where the premium comes, because just like with the pig, I'm sure there's certain parts that more people want. Boneless, skinless breast is the highest demanded. So the real challenge comes into selling that whole bird at enough of a premium to offset those additional costs, because we can easily sell the boneless, skinless breast at that premium, but not necessarily the drumsticks and not necessarily the wings. And so it's that balancing that equation, and it becomes even more difficult as that demand for boneless, skinless breast continues to really drive the chicken industry. When we look at it from the cost standpoint, it costs about 10% more to raise No Antibiotics Ever chicken flocks than the conventional feed. And when you look at the No Antibiotics Ever and the American Humane, there's two areas that add cost. So for No Antibiotics Ever, there's more expensive feed because you can't use some of those alternative ingredients like meat and bone meal, because we're also no animal byproducts. So you lose some of those ingredients like that. You also have to do more planned feed sequencing through your system for milling and transportation, and that adds costs. You also have a slight decrease in bird performance, livability, growth rate, and calorie conversion all become more challenged. You also have increased sanitation, so you have to have your barns have to be changed out, the litter, more frequently. You have to just have much tighter biosecurity as well, and you have to really have stronger interventions around the breeder vaccinations and things like that. And I know Bill, if he was here, he always talks about the difference is really everything has to go right when you have No Antibiotics Ever. It's not that, yes, you can do everything, but he goes, you really have to have everything go right for it to really work efficiently. And currently, again, we still have some flocks that are not No Antibiotics Ever. So if we do run into a barn where there's like a challenge, we can rotate out and go to a different barn, and that helps. But eventually, if you get to that 100%, that's going to be a lot more challenging. In terms of costs, you also have that reduced barn density that I mentioned. That has to be both for the antibiotic-free and the certification for the animal welfare. And you also have to have, from the certification side, there's more stringent lighting standards that have to be complied with. There's segregation protocols that you have to meet with what product has been audited and not. And then there's also that like annual auditing and licensing. So again, that's what kind of accounts for that 10%. And the big question really becomes, you know, as we look out from today to that 100%, no antibiotics ever, you know, is it sustainable long term? And again, I'm quoting Bill. He believes that it is. He sees that it is something that we can do, but it's going to require that kind of constant monitoring. And it's really an ever-changing environment, just like any time production with live animals is. But you always have to be looking at new products, probiotics, feed ingredients, and vaccines. There also, you have to really find that balance between animal care, good animal care, and no antibiotics ever. And that's one thing we talk about a lot, is that even though, yes, we will never label a product, no antibiotics ever, that's been treated with antibiotics, we'll also never withhold antibiotics, you know, on animals that are sick, because we want to make sure, ensure that animal humane care is, and antibiotics are really an important tool for that. So we want to continue that as well. And couple things, pitfalls that, you know, we expected or we saw is, and what we expect to come, what works today isn't going to work tomorrow, because everything changes. And what works in one barn isn't going to work in another, or one might work in Minnesota, might not work in Wisconsin. So again, that's where a lot of those challenges come in. So with that, you know, the question really is, how much harder is that to make the economics work for hogs? And thankfully, I don't have to explain that. So I'm going to let Dr. Aaron Gaines take that one.
Well, Julie certainly asked the million-dollar question, and this morning I'm really going to approach that from an innovation point of view. We talked earlier about value-driven innovation, where we have a business need, and then the innovation team takes that need and comes up with a solution that ultimately provides more value to the organization. I'm going to really take a case study approach here this morning. I want to point out a couple things before I get into the actual case study. Within the Maschhoffs system on the hog side, we do not have any of our production flow on a no antibiotics ever program or antibiotic-free program. So we're early on in this journey looking at this opportunity. And if you see Julie start to twitch up here when I mention antibiotic-free, I did not change my slides to reflect no antibiotics ever. So we'll keep an eye on her. So this is how really antibiotic-free works within our system. And with a multi-customer model, we have been approached to look at antibiotic-free within the Maschhoffs. So what happens is our customers, they have a problem, perhaps an opportunity to provide antibiotic-free pork. Our supply chain director gets a call, and they're looking for supply of hogs to go into their facilities to provide that customer need. Of course, he gets really excited because usually there's some type of premium involved, and then he comes back to the organization and really presents the opportunity. And that's where we have to bring him back to business reality a bit, and looking at the Maschhoffs system, probably not unlike a lot of your systems, we've seen increased prevalence of endemic and epidemic disease challenges within the system. A lot of this is a function of where we raise our pigs. You look at, we operate across 10 states, and we've seen an increased number of pigs grow in those key geographies. We've also experienced some health destabilization within our multiplication flow. And then in 2014, we got to experience new epidemic disease with PED virus. And then with our asset base, as Bradley talked about, we've done a lot of our growth through acquisition. We've not had the opportunity to do greenfield growth and build these assets where they're perfectly sized. And so with that, we've got a mismatch of our assets that we're taking on with our regional model. But currently, because of that asset base, we have to rely on commingled flows given the size of those assets and the incoming pig flow. So certainly creates some challenges as we think about antibiotic-free production. The second reality is that we're seeing a reduction in antibiotic usage already within the industry. Our intentions to reduce antibiotic usage, as you think about new FDA guidance documents that are coming at us in 2017. And so the question is, how big is this runway for producing antibiotic-free pork and gaining a premium in that marketplace? And as Julie mentioned, as we think about this opportunity, we really got to think about what does this mean in terms of the caretakers that are taking care of our pigs. Certainly some challenges as we look at some of our lessons learned from our friends over on the poultry side is how do we maintain a high standard of animal care. So the intensity of animal management is going to have to increase with these type of specialty programs. So in terms of our approach, and really the critical question, we start with asking the question, all right, there's a premium to be gained with production of antibiotic-free pork. So what's it going to cost us? And so we've wrestled with that internally, utilized some of our internal data as well as outside sources of information. Some of your experiences for those of you that have either dipped your toe in the water and currently providing antibiotic-free pork, but we have an estimate, and this is always changing as we gain new information, but somewhere between 114 to 121% higher cost production over our traditional practices. And of course, the major economic driver as we look at taking on this type of project is pre- and post-weaning mortality. And I'll show you some data here in upcoming slides on what we found with antibiotic-free production in a research setting. And as we look back through history where we've taken on some of these specialty programs, our tendency has been to underestimate the true cost of these programs. So we get in, start the program, and then we do a post-mortem analysis, and we're like, shoot, boy, we didn't catch that, and we're not realizing the profitability that we modeled. And so that's one of the things that we're getting better at, and certainly something that you don't want to underestimate. So you try to bring as many minds to the table, try to leverage lessons learned. In this case, try to leverage lessons from the poultry side of the business to make sure we capture those costs that we don't foresee because we lack the experience. And then the critical question that Julie raised is how do we do this sustainably and optimize it longer term? And this is something from our perspective that's not going to get worked out by the veterinarian and the nutritionist. Shoot, 80% of the time they don't get along. So, got a laugh out of Dr. Johnson here. So what we do is really take a multifaceted approach, and what that means is really more minds the better. We're not going to saddle this problem with just the nutritionist and the veterinarian. We're going to leverage subject matter experts out of the other areas, whether that's genetics, whether it's our scientists in housing, whether it's our supply chain personnel. But really it's an all hands on deck approach to coming up with a solution to the problem so we can capture the opportunity and hopefully optimize it and sustain it within the system. So what I'm going to do is really kind of set the stage on the hurdle that we have to overcome to optimize ABF. And so this is a study that we conducted in 2014. It's a really simple two-treatment study where we did a control, which would be our standard practices, and we had a second treatment that was no antibiotics. And I want to point out that this is no antibiotics ever. It was no antibiotics from weaning to harvest. So the sows and the piglets would have been treated in lactation. We did have 32 pens per treatment, about 1,000 pigs per treatment group. This study was not designed per se to look at mortality and morbidity differences. Typically, when we're trying to detect, something like a 1% difference, we're going to be looking at 6,000 to 7,000 animals per treatment group. But you're going to see, based on the magnitude of the response, we were able to pick up some differences in mortality and morbidity. So I'll focus in on kind of the key results here. Again, this is a wean to market study. We do, within our system, we're a fixed weight system, so these pigs would have went to a fixed market weight. But if you start looking at some traits like average daily gain, for average daily gain, we saw a 5% reduction in average daily gain. We typically look at this metric on a carcass basis. And then you look at feed efficiency. This is expressed gain to feed ratio, about a 3% reduction in gain to feed ratio. Morbidity and mortality, as I stated earlier, this study was not set up to specifically look at mortality and morbidity, but we saw a significant increase in mortality and morbidity, effectively doubled for the treatment not fed antibiotics. So again, as you look at the economic model, this is a major driver when we look at a specialty program to provide antibiotic-free pork. So as we look at this multifaceted approach, I'm going to give you really 4 examples of how collectively we take on this problem to optimize ABF long-term so it's sustainable. So we'll start with nutrition. So the nutritionist is certainly on the hook. Julie mentioned within GNP company, one of the challenges with ABF, or no antibiotics ever, is the impact on a feed mill, because you got multiple diets. You got diets that are set up with antibiotics, diets that are not, that can have antibiotics, and so there's increased diets, which results in changeover costs for the feed mill. And so we're going to challenge the nutritionist as part of this to really design feeding programs that perhaps reduce the number of phases and offset some of those extra costs at the feed mill. Second challenge we're going to give them is identifying feed additives or ingredients that improve pig health. Certainly a lot of those products that are coming to market more and more every day as we move into an environment with reduced antibiotic use, or in this case, programs that don't allow for antibiotic use. And then lastly, really leveraging antibiotic alternatives to offset some of the growth and feed conversion impact we saw in the previous slide. Turn to the health experts, really going to ask them to work with our production teams, identify source flows that are best suited for ABF. As I mentioned earlier, we do commingle, and we'll talk more about kind of our flow strategy in the housing section, but that's going to be something that they're going to have to be attuned to, what source flow works best for ABF. With that, we're going to have to increase diagnostic testing. If we designate a flow to antibiotic-free, certainly going to have a backup flow. If we've signed up for a commitment with our customer, we have to hit that volume commitment. So we're going to have to continue to monitor those animals to make sure that we mitigate and manage any disease risks that could come into that flow or flows. And then on the biosecurity front, certainly going to have to take on more advanced methods and technologies to improve biosecurity, again, to manage epidemic disease risk of those dedicated flows. And then as we think about technology, certainly want to leverage newer existing technologies, whether that's a vaccine or other means to reduce and or eliminate disease pressure associated with endemic disease. Again, in the vein, everything's got to go right, as Bill Lanner's would say. Move to an example on the genetics front. One of the questions, and I'm going to show some data on this, is really understanding what genetic lines are best suited for ABF. And then even within genetic line, need to understand what individual sire or sires may be better suited for ABF. So I'll set up this data slide. This is really looking at sire line differences in wean to market mortality. And over on the y-axis, that's the deviation in wean to market mortality from the mean. We've got 7 different sire lines represented on the x-axis. And so I did not put the names on here, obviously protect the innocent. It's a combination of our internal sire line as well as some external lines. But the thing to point out here is the range in mortality across the sire lines. There's a range of almost 3% across the sire lines. So you start thinking about ABF production. The geneticist is certainly going to probably be looking at sire line G for that ABF type program, and not perhaps sire line C, depending on what the overall value contribution is of those lines. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the other piece of this puzzle is looking at the within line sire differences on wean to market mortality. This is some data out of our commercial test herd, actually on our proprietary line, and this looks at a combination of pre and post weaning mortality expressed as total mortality. And so, again, same axis as before, looking at the deviation in mortality from the mean. And then we look at the range. As we saw before, the range was about 3%, but within line sire line difference ranges from 10% to nearly 15%. So almost a 25% difference in wean to market mortality rate. So as it relates to ABF production, frankly, regardless of ABF production, we want to get rid of these sires out here on the far side. They're animals that are not going to be robust to handle an ABF program, and frankly, in some cases, not robust enough to handle just traditional practices within the system. So the last example is on the housing front, and we talked about this a little bit on the poultry side, is we really need to understand the housing requirements for antibiotic-free production, specifically to stocking density. At this point, we do know that when we increase floor spaces and get below 6 square feet, morbidity and mortality rate tends to increase. Question is that response different for ABF? For what we know in poultry, certainly looks like they have to reduce stocking rates with antibiotic-free to reduce stress on that animal. The second thing we want our housing people to be thinking about is how do we design our facilities to accommodate better animal care practices associated with ABF program? How do we make it easier for the caretaker given the increased intensity of animal management with these type of flows? And then we talked earlier about our commingling that we have to do in the system because our assets are not right-sized between our breed-to-wean sow farms and our wean-to-market assets, and so we really need to find a flow strategy on how do we reduce fill time and really get our assets right-sized to take on antibiotic-free pork production. And then lastly, we need to start thinking about potential segregation of parity 1 offspring. We don't do a lot of parity seg. We've dissolved that through time, but that's something that's certainly on our radar screen, is how does parity segregation fit back into the equation for antibiotic-free pork production. With that, I'll hand it back over to Bradley to wrap up.
Well, I want to take this opportunity, and I thought it probably prudent that I just clarify for this audience that one of the risks is that you took away from our presentation as we used antibiotic-free as our model to speak to this morning, that we were up here with an infomercial for antibiotic-free meat production. That's not the case. I hope you didn't take that away. It's certainly one of the synergies between our organization that I wanted to highlight. What I do hope you took away from us this morning is we're an organization that's founded at the heart of a passion for pig production. We've undergone a very rapid growth trajectory as a result of that passion, the commitment that our shareholders and owners have to this business. And as a result, we've expanded, diversified our business along that growth trajectory to include our sister company in poultry production. Following our bullish sentiment for the protein sector overall, we continue to leverage the strengths of our people, the talent base that we feel blessed with, against what we see as a very dynamic consumer sentiment. And we wrestle routinely with how it is that we invest what is, we both know, a very capital-intensive business, positioning it increasingly more towards this very dynamic consumer interest. We plan to be a long-term participant and certainly a stakeholder and within this industry for a long time to come. Dr. Johnson, Dr. Morrison, again, it's been truly an honor and a privilege to be a part of this. We appreciate and thank you for the opportunity to present our business.